Week 11 of fantasy football season, and here's a few defense DST units. I located off the wire this week. The first one, the Miami Dolphins. So the Dolphins here, it's another streaming week for this Miami Dolphin team coming off the bye week, and they got a great matchup versus the Vegas Raiders. That really can't move the football too much this season, giving up the 10th most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. So the last few weeks here for Miami, week 7 in Philly, 31 points allowed, 3 sacks, an INT, a fumble recovery, pick 6 in that one. Week 8 versus New England, 17 points allowed, 3 sacks. And week 9 in Kansas City, 15 points allowed, 2 sacks, and a fumble recovery over there in Germany. So this week here, good matchup versus the Vegas Raiders. Available right now in 62% of fantasy leagues. And we've seen this defense of Miami pounce on bad offenses. And now with Jalen Ramsey back over the last few weeks, Xavier Howard back as well, I think this defense could go to work and make some plays for this Washington Commander team and get back on track versus weak Raider offense. The next DST is the Washington Commanders, so this team's another streaming option this week is the Commanders. A great matchup versus the New York Giants. They're available right now in 79% of fantasy leagues. In the last few weeks, they really haven't done much, but week 7, going back to that Giant game at New York, 14 points allowed, 4 sacks, 2 fumble recoveries. Week 8 versus Philly, 38 points allowed, 2 sacks in that one, 2 fumble recoveries. Week 9 in New England, 17 points allowed, an INT. In week 10 in Seattle, 29 points allowed and a sack. So this defense, we know they traded away Montez Sweat, Chase Young at the NFL trade deadline, to 2 premier pass rushers gone from this defensive line. But the Giants give up the most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. I know the Dallas Cowboys really didn't put up huge fantasy points versus them, but it was just a game where the Giants, they were playing pedestrian offense and pretty much running the football a whole lot in short, safe passes. But this week here versus Washington, that doesn't have an offense like the Dallas Cowboys. I think we could see Tommy DeVito take more chances and make more mistakes here for this New York Giant team. So this Commander team is a streaming option. I think they could be decent. But if it's a defense you're going to hold on to for the remainder of the season, obviously they're not going to be usable in that case. The next DST is the Detroit Lions. So the Lions, we know their defense has been solid as well this season versus bad offenses. And this week here, a nice streaming option, the Lions will be versus the Bears that give up the 3rd most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. So going back to a game where they were streaming option in week 8 versus Vegas, 8 points allowed, 6 sacks, and an INT. So right now, Justin Fields, I'm assuming he's going to be back in this game, but I don't know what the Bears are doing over there with Justin Fields. I don't know if the thumb's 100% or not. Khalil Herbert, he practiced last week as well, but didn't play, even though Deonta Foreman has been filling in well. But this Lion team coming off a monster shootout, it's a home game for Detroit where their defense has played home better this season than they have on the road. And I think this week here versus a Bear offense that really hasn't been great this season and have turned the ball over and hasn't put up points for the most part, I think this Lion DST could go out there and be a solid streaming option, available in 70% of fantasy leagues. Next DST is the Jacksonville Jaguars. So the Jaguars up there in turnovers caused this season, and they're another great streaming option as well, available in 80% of fantasy leagues, with a good matchup versus the Tennessee Titans, where they're a team that just can't find the end zone for the most part this season. And this Jacksonville Jaguar DST had 3 games in a row before the Week 10 loss versus the Niners, where they had double-digit fantasy points. So this week, I think they get back on track. Like I said, available in 80% of fantasy leagues. They create turnovers. They got ball hawks on the defense. And I think the young quarterback in Will Levis, who struggled over the last few weeks to find the end zone, I think this Jacksonville Jaguar defense could go out there and bounce back after this San Francisco 49er offense took them to town in this one. So right now, while they were out there in 80% of fantasy leagues and they're versing a pedestrian offense that has trouble finding the end zone, they're a nice streaming option this week. And the final DST I looked at off the wire this week here is the Los Angeles Chargers. There's Charger DST. Obviously, they're not good versus high-powered offenses, but this season in situations as a streaming option, they've been solid. Week 8 versus the Bears, a streaming option, 13 points allowed, a sack, 2 interceptions. Week 9 at the Jets on Monday Night Football, 6 points allowed, 8 sacks, 3 fumble recoveries, and a return touchdown. So right now, good matchup here versus the Green Bay Packers in Green Bay. I know it's a cross-country trip, cold weather in there for Lambeau for this team. Week 9 versus Jets, where I thought that was going to be a disadvantage for them, but they went in there and made some plays and put up a performance. And when you got pass rushers like Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack versus a weak offensive line and a young quarterback, I think this defense can make some plays. They're available right now in tons of fantasy leagues at 77%. And as a streaming option, like I said, they've come up this season in those streaming type of games and main plays. So that's a few defense DST units I look to add here in week 11 of the fantasy football season.